All right, let's get into this explainer mapping out the real-world impact of the Trump administration's actions from May 29th through June 4th, 2026. If you're trying to figure out how sweeping executive orders and massive legislative battles actually hit your wallet, your workplace, and your community, well, you're in the exact right place. Today, we're connecting the dots. We're moving from global conflicts straight down to household economics and looking at the very structure of our federal government.
Let's kick things off with a number that really sets the tone for the entire week, 215 to 208. On June 3rd, that narrow House vote set the stage for a sequence of events connecting high-stakes constitutional clashes literally directly to the price you pay at the gas pump. It's just a perfect example of how Washington's procedural fights, well, they rarely stay in Washington.
To make sense of it all, here's our roadmap. Number 1, war powers and fuel prices. 2, tax cuts versus rising deficits. 3, the tariff trade-offs. 4, reshaping the federal workforce. And 5, ethical risks and legal clashes.
Starting right off with Section 1, war powers and fuel prices.
So, that narrow House vote we just mentioned, that was a resolution aimed at forcing the president to either seek congressional approval or withdraw U.S. forces from hostilities involving Iran. The legal mechanism here is actually fascinating. Under the War Powers Resolution, unapproved military action triggers a strict countdown clock. You get 60 days until action must terminate, with a maximum 90-day extension for withdrawal. Now, critics argue the Iran conflict has blown right past this statutory window. But the administration? They're relying on a legal theory that the clock is actually paused by a ceasefire. The legal force of this House vote is fiercely contested, but the economic reality definitely isn't.
And this brilliantly illustrates why abstract constitutional disputes actually matter to working-class families. The Associated Press confirmed that this specific overseas conflict is directly fueling inflation and driving up fuel costs for regular Americans. So when a war powers clock is debated in Congress, the real-world second-order effect is an immediate, heavy strain on households who suddenly have to pay way more just to commute to work.
Which brings us to Section 2, tax cuts versus rising deficits.
Pivoting over to direct household impacts, on June 2nd, the Treasury Department reported some major short-term benefits from the administration's new tax policies. They reported $82 billion in individual relief. Just look at the scale of this. 29 million claims for no tax on overtime and 7.5 million claims for no tax on tips. So these policies are absolutely delivering genuine immediate cash relief to working families right now. However, think tanks like the Cato Institute warn that these carve-outs treat similar labor income differently. And what that does is create massive incentives for businesses and workers to reclassify their compensation just to gain the tax code.
But to understand the full macroeconomic picture, we got to look past that immediate cash flow. The Congressional Budget Office estimates these specific tax cuts are going to increase the unified budget deficit by a staggering $3.4 trillion between 2025 and 2034. That's largely due to lower tax revenues.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is separating immediate relief from second-order effects. Today's financial gain for working-class households is effectively mortgaged against future public risks. I mean, a $3.4 trillion deficit increase can significantly raise national borrowing costs. For regular Americans, this long-term fiscal risk means a much higher likelihood of constrained future social spending, reduced public investments, or even future cuts to the very safety net programs they rely on for economic security.
We see a really similar dynamic in Section 3, the tariff trade-offs.
To manage some of those domestic price pressures, a June 1st proclamation modified the national security tariff regime for aluminum, steel, and copper. By carving out a temporarily reduced 15% tariff rate for agricultural equipment and residential HVAC systems, the action creates some clear winners. It relieves farmers, construction firms, and, families just trying to fix their AC. But on the flip side, it leaves broader supply chains to absorb the higher costs of restricted trade. Ultimately, the net effect on the working class entirely depends on whether the goal of domestic job resilience outweighs the higher consumer prices for everyday goods.
And beyond immediate prices, these targeted exemptions create a massive behavioral shift. When the government hands out temporary carve-outs, it creates immediate lobbying incentives for every other industry to seek their own exemptions. It's like a gold rush. This risks shifting the nation's economic policy away from rule-based, predictable design and toward a system of political allocation and favors. That leaves small businesses, the ones who can't exactly afford high-priced lobbyists, at a stark disadvantage.
This leads us naturally to Section 4, reshaping the federal workforce.
Moving to systemic institutional shifts.
A June 3rd executive order implemented what is known as Schedule Policy/Career. This fundamentally changes how the federal government is staffed. By reclassifying policy-influencing career positions, this order exempts these covered roles from standard adverse action procedures. In plain English, it removes traditional civil service protections, making those federal employees much easier to fire.
Now, the administration's stated goal here is accountability, making it easier to remove underperforming officials. But the glaring second-order effect is the politicization risk. It threatens the independent expertise of agencies serving regular Americans. If institutional knowledge is replaced by loyalty filtering, the administrative quality of the government degrades. This means the agencies that handle benefits delivery, enforce workplace safety for labor dignity, and manage disaster responses like FEMA, they could become less professionally independent and far more politically obedient.
At the exact same time, a separate May 29th order authorized salaries up to $400,000 to recruit elite national security talent in areas like critical minerals. This signals a massive shift toward an expensive, highly specialized bureaucracy in favored sectors. The risk here is pretty clear: elite payroll expansion without measurable execution gains. We could end up with a much more expensive federal payroll without actually building stronger supply chains.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, Ethical Risks and Legal Clashes.
We've got to examine the severe ethical boundaries and legal roadblocks being tested this week regarding how federal money is controlled. The administration proposed a $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund, but this fund has faced immediate challenges due to glaring conflict of interest concerns, primarily because it reportedly emerged from the president's personal litigation with the IRS. Yet, despite that, the Senate recently advanced a $70 billion Department of Homeland Security bill without actually banning this fund.
Because Congress failed to explicitly ban this controversial fund, the courts have stepped in. Al Jazeera reported that lawsuits challenging the fund's legality have resulted in a temporary judicial block. So right now, this massive ethical clash over executive control of funds remains frozen in judicial limbo, directly testing the legal boundaries of the executive branch.
Alongside these financial clashes, the administration pushed through several other rapid-fire regulatory changes. On May 29th, an order rescinded off-road vehicle restrictions on federal lands. That trades long-term ecological stability for an immediate boost in rural recreation. That same day, another executive order directed a review of CDC childhood vaccine schedules to prioritize parental authority. This introduces a profound process risk if scientific medical frameworks are altered by political directives. Finally, a June 2nd AI order mandated cybersecurity upgrades, which, if implemented correctly, could actually provide immense resilience to rural hospitals against cyber threats.
Bringing it all together for the final analysis.
Looking at the entire week from May 29th to June 4th, a highly coherent pattern emerges regarding how the working class is truly being affected. Working-class Americans might indeed see temporary cash flow from tip and overtime tax carve-outs or enjoy a momentary pause on HVAC tariffs, but the causality we've mapped out today shows that those immediate gains are heavily mortgaged. They're mortgaged against a massive future deficit, the inflationary pressures of unapproved overseas conflicts, and the rapid politicization of the very federal agencies meant to protect American workplace safety. The undeniable reality of this week's actions is that today's short-term relief is borrowing directly against tomorrow's institutional stability. The true cost of this week won't be fully felt until the bill for that stability inevitably comes due.